Hello and a very warm welcome to the Big Bright podcast. My name's Emma and today we are very excited to welcome Rachel Gilmore, an executive coach of 13 years, with clients including the National History Museum and the editor-in-chief of Elle Magazine. Here at Bright, Rachel is helping us develop our leadership capability and to create a feedback culture that is both impactful and useful and helps us focus on continuous development rather than a tick box performance appraisal system. Endlessly curious about how people learn and express themselves, Rachel is also a Clean Language Practitioner, a progressive and subtle communication and coaching method that uses the client's own words and metaphors to phrase questions that are neither leading or full of jargon. So, how can coaching help us become improved leaders? As part of our International Women's Day mini-series, we've invited Rachel onto the podcast to discover how she supports industry leaders in their quest to become better communicators and managers. We also delve into the topics of creating an authentic voice in the workplace and proactive ways to cope with that dreaded imposter syndrome. So welcome, Rachel.
Hello, thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me to do this. It's nice to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Obviously, you have been working with Bright for a little while, so you're already familiar with the team.
Yeah.
So it felt only right to, have you on as part of our International Women's Day series. So to kick off, something you focus on in your coaching for organisations is creating a healthy team culture. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about how a company can ensure they're taking the right steps to cultivating this?
Okay, yeah, I love working with companies on culture. It's my kind of thing, and I really enjoy and specialise working with and enabling kind of creative tech cultures. And where I always tend to start, which might feel a bit counterintuitive, is at the individual level. So what I'll often do is come into an organisation and kind of speak to the people that are there and kind of find out what's going on, what's working well, what's not working so well, and what they'd like to be different. And then bring that pool of people together and start to really kind of encourage a new and a different and a more effective communication style. So I'm trying to get people to learn to kind of really listen to each other and ask these non-leading or clean questions. And these clean questions that you referenced a moment ago, which are about using the other person's words and not being leading or judgmental, these questions really help create curiosity. And of course, if we can get curious about one another, then that's when we start to learn, we start to increase our feelings of relatedness, we see each other as human beings, and it increases our understanding of one another. Then we start to teach people how to notice when they are in a really positive mind state for work, or if they're in a negative mind state. Are they coming from their neocortex, their learning brain? And if they're not, how to get into it, because that's where we problem solve and we can collaborate and we get creative in that part of the brain. So helping people know when they're in that brain state and how to get into it, help people think about drama and notice when they're in drama, recognise when others are in drama. So what I'm doing here is coming in at the individual level and giving them some tools around communicating and relating to one another.
So when you say drama, can you explain a bit more about being in drama? Because I haven't heard that term before.
As human beings, a lot of us are in drama a lot of the time. We can be in drama in our own heads about something. What shall I have for dinner tonight? We had a conversation before we started, didn't we, about what time we go to bed, and I was thinking, oh God, I wish I could go to bed a bit earlier in the mornings. That's a tiny, teeny example of drama, where I'm kind of berating myself for not going to bed a bit earlier. So when we're in drama, we're tending to come from one of three positions. We're speaking like we're a victim, we're speaking like we're a persecutor, or we're speaking like we're a rescuer. And you can look this up, it's Karpman's drama triangle. And of course, this plays out in organisations all the time. And a dramatic example of drama would be a row or an argument. I've just given you a small little example of drama. And really, we don't want to be in drama because drama is emotionally draining, it's tiring, and it perpetuates. So if we can teach people to notice when they're in drama with their colleagues, in drama with a project, in drama with a client, if we can get them to notice when they're in drama and give them the tools to get themselves and other people out of drama. So then we're starting to give this system or this culture some really useful tools and techniques for communicating and relating to one another. And when we've got that, then we can get the culture to start to look at, well, when I'm working at my best, I'm like what? When this team is at its best, it's like what? And when this organisation is operating at its best, it is like what? And when it's like that, then what happens? And if we get the whole team or the whole organisation to engage in a conversation like that, this is when they start to really have a shared understanding of what makes them an organisation, what makes them a culture, what their purpose is as an organisation, and what they need to be doing to make all of that happen, and what are the skills and the behaviours that they need to be demonstrating. And so that's a kind of whistle-stop tour to how I might support an organisation develop the skills and the way of being in order to focus on the culture it wants and to do that culture change, that culture piece of thinking about what kind of culture does this organisation need in order to do well.
And I suppose everybody needs to be on the same page with that. So it's learning as a collective the culture you're leading towards and understanding, everybody understanding that and everybody working towards the same goal, which I suppose makes sense if you're starting from the individual and then you then go out into a wider sphere.
Yeah, I mean, often the top team might be kind of responsible for setting some of that up and setting a bit of a direction and talking about what they want the company purpose or vision to be. And then I've seen organisations where they'll write like value statements and say, oh yes, we are optimistic here and we are honest and we are open-minded and creative. Now, of course, unless you do that work with everyone and you have that kind of individual, that grassroots building up to the top, if you don't do that, then of course everybody will have a different understanding of what creative means. Because when you think about creative, when I think about creative, we both think of different things. But in an organisation, you want there to be a shared understanding of what creative means at this company. And so you have to have that kind of dialogue. And to have that dialogue, you've got to have the skills to have it. So it's sort of a bit of skill development. Then it's about supporting the organisation to have the dialogue that it needs to have so that it can be focused on the culture that it wants.
That leads us quite nicely onto our next question about ensuring how a team can feel connected and empowered. And that's something that we are really keen to promote at Bright, and especially working remotely for the foreseeable future. And we found actually that it's not easy. It's not an easy task, and it takes quite a bit of creative thinking to adapt and inspire to different situations, especially when everybody is apart. So in terms of making sure that everybody does feel connected remotely and empowered in their roles and able to communicate, do you have any tips or is there any examples you could share with us of a company or companies you feel do it really well?
Yeah, so I think it's starting at that individual level and asking people, how do they feel connected? How do they feel empowered? I mean, I'm just thinking about a recent example of a client that I was working with, and the CEO had picked up the phone to one of the more junior members of the team to kind of get a heads up, find out how a task was going. And I think he thought that that was really nice and personable of him to be like picking up the phone and chatting. And that would have worked for me because I'm an extrovert, but I know that this team member's an introvert. So that sends her into a spin, being called up by the CEO and being put on the spot. And actually, when I talked to her, she was like, actually, all I need is a text 5 or 10 minutes ahead to just say, hey, can you do a call in 10 minutes about X? And then that gives her enough time to settle herself, mentally prepare, and then be ready and be focused when the kind of CEO calls up. Yeah, you need to just ask people what they want and then kind of check in regularly. And because we're all different and we all need slightly different communication style. So then the organisation really, depending on its size, then really needs to kind of provide as many different kinds of formats and forums for communication as they can. And what's important is they're really clear about each different type of communication forum or format and what the purpose of each is and whether people are invited to attend, whether it's compulsory or not. So the sorts of things that probably should be happening on a daily basis is there should be like a good morning kind of kickoff and a close of the day kind of goodbye. Now, they're really important, particularly if anybody is working from home without a family around them in a shared house, or that they traditionally have used work for socialising. That's really important for them. And then you need a mix during the day of like coffee break, an impromptu or spontaneous, inviting someone for a cup of tea, and just giving people those opportunities to just check in during the day when they might need to just speak to somebody.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like the check-in and the close is really important, because obviously when you come to an office or work in an office, you have the good morning, and then you have just the chat, the small talk. And I think sometimes when you work remotely, you just go straight into work and you don't have, that socialization with your colleagues that you would normally have, especially for new starters. I think that must be really hard.
Yeah, and not everybody will need it. Not everybody will need that. Some people want to just get straight on with their work, but some people to know that between 9 and 9:30 there's an open forum where they can come in, say hello. Anybody could be there. They can just come in and say hello. It might be a time where they just can say out loud what their priorities for the day are. It could be them reflecting on a programme they watched last night, but just providing that space and place where people can check in, like you would do, like you said, when you walk into work in the morning. It's a bit weird if you walk into work in the morning and don't say hello to your colleagues.
Just sit down at your desk and just crack on. It would be very bizarre, wouldn't it?
Yeah, everybody would be like, what's wrong with them? So, those kind of small informal things need to be happening on a daily basis. And then weekly it needs to get a bit more formal. So weekly you should be having a one-to-one with your line manager, should be having a team meeting. And those team meetings are to come together to collectively problem solve, be creative. And then there probably should be some kind of social or drinks that's voluntary for people to come along to if they need it. And then it's really interesting, I think, sometimes that then people don't look at projects differently or client needs. So around each project, there should be a kick-off, a midway review, and an evaluation. What have we learnt? What are we going to do differently next time? And then for client meetings, especially if you're taking someone along with you to client meetings to help them develop, there should be a setup before that meeting, thinking about how you want the meeting to go. And there should be a meeting booked in pretty soon after, if not straight after, to say, how did that go? What did you learn? What are you going to do differently next time? Some other companies that I've worked with that I've been impressed with have introduced like a leadership forum, and sometimes it's like a book group. They read a book and all come together, or it's facilitated like an action learning set where they kind of share the challenges they're facing and coach one another around their current leadership challenges. So I think there's lots of different forums and formats. And I think there's one other thing that companies are being really savvy and doing. They are creating forums that are about work or professional, but not about a task. They're not about a project. They're not about talking shop at the moment. What they're doing is they're creating seminars. I'm kind of running a series of sessions for a client, and we're calling them meaningful connections. Because what people are telling me that they're really missing is that bumping into someone in a corridor, the water cooler moment, but interacting with people who might not be one of their peers and might not be in their team, but somebody else across the organisation who they might say hi to in a corridor. And so I've been running these sessions called Meaningful Connections, where people come together around work-related themes that are universal, that apply to everyone. So we've already mentioned imposter syndrome, so might run a session on imposter syndrome or setting boundaries, being a working parent, how to create healthy work habits. And they're universal themes. And so anybody in the organisation can come along to one of these sessions. And the sessions are designed that people get to work in pairs and in trios quite frequently. So they're getting these little interactions with people, these kind of little intimate moments where they can just talk to colleagues about what's going on for them.
It's interesting how you talk about they can go off in pairs, because I think sometimes when you're in a big Zoom meeting, it's quite easy for people to get lost. Like you said, some people are more introverted, some people are happier just to pipe up. And I think when I've been in a Zoom meeting, when I've been in a breakout room, the conversations that I've had with the other people have been way more candid and way more informal and more honest, because we're happier to share in smaller groups and you have more time to have that connection and that conversation. Whereas I do find in Zoom meetings, and it's been something we've talked about a bit at Bright, is that sometimes you really have to sort of say, right, X person, what do you think about this? Because otherwise people don't feel comfortable just sharing without being asked. So again, it feels like the main theme of everything here is all about the communication and understanding how people communicate and how people want to communicate. And that is very different from person to person.
There's two things here. So there's one around how do you design a session that's really engaging, or a meeting that's really engaging, and how do you create it in such a way that you allow those meaningful connections, which is about structuring it in different ways and creating talking topics or talking points or exercises for people to go away in small groups, have that more intimate experience, and then come back and share what they've learned. And what you're also referencing here is there's a whole new skill set required to facilitating engaging meetings online. I was working online anyway, but in the first lockdown, myself and a peer group, we got together. We met every Friday during lockdown, and we practiced and refined our facilitation techniques over Zoom. So how to use the camera, how to look into the camera and use the camera when you're giving an instruction, how to sit back and lean back to show with your body language that it was time for other people to contribute. And like you said, being much more ready to use people's names and to draw people in and say, oh, I'm just going to speak to this person, ask this person now, and then I'm going to come to so-and-so and find out what you're thinking. So a lot more signposting needs to happen in online meetings to engage people and give people time to think and know how to contribute in a meeting like that.
Do you think it's important for a meeting to have a host almost? Because I feel like it is quite important to have somebody that is facilitating and that is drawing people in. Because if there's no firm leader of the meeting, it can feel like it just falls apart a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always felt that. I facilitate a lot of meetings and go in to organisations and facilitate meetings, but I think even more so online now because of this kind of extra skill set. We're managing a whole nother level of data and content and all the tech that you're having to manage as well at the same time. So it's very hard for you to be an effective participant and host / facilitator of a meeting. You can't really do both, one or the other. The meeting will suffer or you won't be able to contribute in the way that you'd like to. I would always advise people to have a facilitator or a host, especially if you want a really engaging meeting online. I think it's become even more important.
I agree. So an important part of being confident in our ability seems to be around creating an authentic voice within the workplace. Again, this kind of leads on from being remote and being confident in your voice. Do you have advice and do you work with clients on creating an authentic voice?
Authenticity is when what we say, well, this is my kind of definition of authenticity, is when what we say kind of comes from the head, the heart and the gut. So we're actually confident and we believe in what we're saying. We believe in what we're saying, we believe in ourselves, and we believe in what we're kind of striving for and the purpose of what we're communicating. And it kind of needs to resonate on all those levels for it to then be, or sound like, for it to be an authentic voice. You can't fake an authentic voice. You can't act it. So you have to really believe in your value. And so I work with clients helping them to remember really and explore where they've come from, to define and value their unique set of experiences and to know how their voice can really add value in their workplace. Because we know that with diversity of thinking, we get more creativity, we get better decision making on behalf of the customer, on behalf of the client, the community that you're serving. So it's really about helping the person to value and understand themselves and what they're saying and the place that they have in the organisation. And there's a really nice quick exercise here that people can do at home if they want to, which is just, sit down one evening, you can journal this, but just give yourself a time limit, maybe 10 minutes, and just get your journal and write a series of sentences, starting with, I am remarkable because. It feels a bit weird at first, But if you keep writing and keep doing it, put some nice music on in the background, you will start writing things about yourself, and you'll start to remember all these things that you've overcome and you've achieved. And that really, it's an empowering exercise, and it reminds you of your value. And actually, it reminds me that if you have a look at there's a Spring Forward festival coming up in March. It's celebrating digital women online, and they are running an I Am Remarkable event, and it's free. So you can look at the website there and check it out. And I'm running a couple of events for that festival too. So I'm sure you'll put some links to that somewhere and people can go and have a look.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a simple statement, but I'm sure people struggle with it because the British they're not so great all the time, are they? We don't shout about our, wins, and I think we can be quite modest, really. And I think it's maybe more of an American thing to kind of come out and say, like, I'm really great at this and this is what I bring to the table. And I think it's really important to recognise that and be confident in that. And it's a challenge, but I definitely feel that it's, just by starting very small like this, just writing it down and actually just formulating it in your mind, it really does help you to believe what you bring to the table. And I think that's even more important, again, when we're remote and we can sort of fade into the background a little bit and not really realise what we're bringing to the organisation. Whereas we should, be proud to stand up and take charge in a meeting, or maybe offer to do more things because we know that that's a strength of ours. So I love that. I'm definitely going to check these events out, and we'll link to them.
Yeah, give the I Am Remarkable. Like, you can quietly journal it. You can be very British and you can quietly journal it away to yourself. But it is an empowering exercise to do, and then you realise your value through it.
And talking of voice and having your voice heard, a topic that's come up quite a few times in our podcast, especially in the International Women's Day series that we've been running, is how women can have their voice heard in a male-dominated workplace or boardroom. And if one of your clients had this as a concern and wanted to work on this with you, what would you advise them to do?
I would do more work. I would do that work, and I'd do more work on helping them to create a sense of value of themselves and knowing what they're good at. And I do an exercise quite often with clients to help them think about when they're at their best and what might be some of the kind of critical factors that they need to have in place around them to be at their best. So giving them a really clear sense of what kind of place, what kind of people, what kind of environment and company culture enables them to be at their best. Then I always advise people, and this is easier when someone's joining a company, you really, really, really need to do your homework about the organisation that you are entering into. Or if you are, being promoted up to a boardroom, for example, you really, really need to find out about the culture of that workplace or that team or that boardroom before you make the move. And I would really encourage people to put some time and energy into that. I mean, I know from experience, I know I started one job, and I was on the second day, I remember ringing up my dad crying. I knew I'd made a big mistake. It wasn't the right place for me. The telltale signs were probably there. And I remember also being offered another job, and there were some alarm bells. And so I said to them, can I come and spend a day with the team? I'd really like to come and meet everyone and spend a day with the team. And the minute I crossed the threshold into that building, I knew that it wasn't right for me, and I turned the job down. So find out as much as you can. Obviously, you can't go into buildings at the moment.
I was going to say, how can people find out about culture without spending a day there?
So what you need to do is you need to ask to meet your soon-to-be peers. And a good line of inquiry with them is ask to meet them and have one-to-ones with them and ask them, why do you do this job? What is it about it that you love and you like? Why do you do what you do? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find out, is there alignment between, their purpose, why they get up in the morning and do this job, and with your purpose and what you strive for in life. You're not looking for like-minded or similar people, but what you're looking for is alignment in purpose. People who are driven and inspired to make the same kind of difference to the world that you want to make. So that's one thing that you can do to find out, is this group of people aligned enough to me? And of course, you'll either realise that they're not, or you'll realise that they are, and that will be a really good trust building, relationship building exercise to do with them even before you start.
And I suppose you could do that by literally just inviting them for a coffee on Zoom.
Yeah.
And because I think you can tell very quickly, can't you, who you're aligned with and the potential relationship you could have with that person just from having eye contact and a quick conversation.
Yes.
And I think actually if I was working in an organisation and someone approached me, I'd think that's actually really forward thinking, and I'd be really open and happy to do that.
People are really open and happy to do it because they want to get along with you as well. They're curious about you. They want it to work. It's not the work that we do, is it, that we find difficult. It's usually the people that we work with. So people want to get along with you too. And that they will probably admire that you've contacted them. And if you get enough alarm bells and you're starting to think that this environment might not be right for you, then you kind of need to be prepared to walk away, I think. That can be a really difficult call, but sometimes it's just not worth the personal sacrifice. It's very hard being a change agent. It's very hard being the person trying to change things from within. It's emotionally very draining. So you've got to kind of know what you're going into and be up for it. And if you're unsure, then maybe it's just not quite worth that personal sacrifice. Maybe that culture of that place isn't quite right for you, and you'd be better placed elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think it's a really brave decision to make as well, to make that call. But it's so important. I think I'm always thinking we spend so much time at work. There's no point being sad and hating it and, feeling like you don't belong somewhere. It's just such a miserable feeling to carry with you. So definitely on board with, liking the people that you work with, and then everything becomes a lot easier, or being able to get along with them at least. So something I've spoken to quite a few friends and colleagues about who have coaching or are considering coaching is the topic of imposter syndrome, and it seems to be something that does affect a lot of people, and I'm interested to find out a little bit about how you work with clients to tackle the effects of this.
Imposter syndrome seems to be a phrase that people are using a lot at the moment. And imposter syndrome is an internal response. So this is when you experience a dip in confidence, or you worry that you're not as good as you should be. You're going to get found out, that others won't believe in you, or you think that they don't believe in you, or that they don't think that you're competent. And actually, I was working with a client the other day who described this feeling of imposter syndrome. I found out where it had come from, and it had come from a 360 process where she'd been brave, she'd asked people around her, give her some feedback, and they'd inputted it into a system. And then she had an hour with someone from the HR team who kind of gave her all this feedback. And I would just say there are big alarm bells for me around 360 feedback systems. I think they can create more damage than benefit, especially if you've only have an hour feedback session with someone from the HR team. Of course, the feedback in those 360 feedback processes is only as good as the feedback that's been inputted. And that person could have been feeling a bit resentful that day, could have been sat on the computer late at night, oh God, I've been asked to fill in one of these bloody 360 feedback forms. And so they give feedback that's not skillfully delivered. And then the person at the receiving end is then deposited with these whole kind of statements about them in black and white. And so I would just say to people, just be very, very wary of 360 feedback. It's much better for you to go out there and collate the feedback yourself than to use these kinds of processes or systems. For this client, that was the trigger. That was the trigger for her, seeing a statement written about her in black and white without being able to go back or check it or really understand where it came from. So this is what I do with clients. I find out what has triggered this imposter syndrome. Is it a particular person? Is it a particular place? Situation. In this case, it was the 360 process. And I find out what happens for that person when imposter syndrome sets in. Do they get clammy hands? Do they get voices in their head, a nervousness in their chest? Are they like a rabbit in headlights? Then, if we can kind of identify what happens to them and their system, then we can start to identify the early signals that a bout or a wave of imposter syndrome might be coming. Then we develop some techniques to counteract or head off those negative thoughts and feelings. So it'll be different for everyone. So where one client, they freeze, they're like rabbits in the headlights, Then we talk about, well, what are the physiological symptoms that are associated with that? How do they know that the rabbit is coming? And then we might say, well, what would they like to be like? Well, I'd much prefer to be more like a swan on a calm, still waters, gliding along with a broad view, across the lake, for example. Metaphors are so powerful. Metaphors are so rich for people. And we use metaphor all the time. And I use metaphor. It's part of the clean language approach that I use. And so if people can know what it's like when they've got imposter syndrome, then they know where it's come from. If they can, then I start to identify the early signals and then develop a more powerful metaphor or a mantra, or if they embody stuff, they might learn to kind of really like physically shake it out of their system. We can develop these tools and techniques for them to spot it's coming and do something about it before it takes over.
I feel like that could be really useful if you're about to go into something, maybe facing some of these people that you feel trigger your imposter syndrome, like a meeting. You can kind of prep yourself to go into that, because I really feel for your client with the 360 feedback. So I've seen it. I've been in an organisation where the senior management had that and they really suffered from it. And I feel like it was an opportunity for some of their team to really vent. They took that opportunity and it probably wasn't fed back in the most sensitive way, and it really damaged people's confidence. And no feedback should be damaging. You always remember that going forward, don't you? You forget the positives and you always remember the negatives. And it's really interesting to hear about where those triggers come from, and I'm sure they're very different for lots of different people throughout their career as well.
I offer alternatives to the 360 process. So one option is to teach the client and work with the client to help them develop and be skilled at giving and receiving feedback so they can actually go out into the organisation and collate it for themselves. It's far better to have these conversations one-on-one. And they can say, I'm doing a 360 process, but I'm going to, I'd like to do it verbally with you, or I'd like to do it through a series of one-to-ones. That's the ideal. The second option is that somebody like me comes in and has mini interviews with those people. And so I'm collating really useful evidence-based feedback for that person that's balanced. What's working well, what's not working well, what can this person be doing differently? And then I feed it back. And then I'm looking for themes. I'm not feeding back every bit of feedback. I'm looking for the themes across that pool of people. And I'm then delivering that feedback in a very evidence-based way so that the person on the receiving end can really understand it. It lands, they can understand it. And importantly, they know what they can do differently. They've got some tangible actions of how they can improve on things.
Do you think that feedback should ever be anonymous, or do you think that people should have to take ownership of the feedback they're giving about somebody else?
Yeah, I don't think feedback should be anonymous. I think it's a bit like trolling, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Because I think, I've seen instances that someone's brought up some feedback and then an example from like 4 years ago. It's crazy to feedback like that. So I think your ways sound a lot more measured and taking the emotion out.
When feedback is rooted in evidence, something that you and I have both seen and heard. So yes, we both saw that email that went to that client. We were both in that meeting and noticed when I raised my eyebrow when a comment was made. So something that we have both seen and heard, when feedback is rooted in evidence, something that we've both seen and heard, we're both coming from an agreed starting point. And the emotion does go because it's an objective thing that has happened. And then we can discuss the different inferences we've had. So when you saw me raise my eyebrow, you thought that I was raising my eyebrow about a comment that somebody else made in the meeting. That might be the case, but something else could have happened. Maybe my mobile phone went off in my pocket for the third time that morning, and I think I know who it was, and I was raising my eyebrows at that. Even if we've both seen or heard the same bit of evidence, we can both have multiple and different inferences about what that actually meant and the impact that it's had on us. And so if we start from evidence, we can explore together those different inferences and impacts of what happened.
Absolutely. Oh, it's been so fascinating to talk to you about everything we've talked about today. And I think it's been really great to get some of your actual tangible things that people can do if they are facing any of these worries or imposter syndrome. So I'm sure a lot of people listening will be really interested to find out a bit more about your coaching services and the events that you're running. So what is the best way of getting in touch with you and finding out some more information?
People can check out my website. It's easy. It's rachelgilmore.com. And they can email me if they are interested in some coaching. Oh, I would like to quickly put it out there that I'm actually doing a research project at the moment. I am interested in finding out about what leaders' fears and challenges are at the moment and what they would like to be different about their organisation and about how they lead. And so I am conducting research. I'm offering 30-minute mini reflective coaching sessions where people can reflect on their leadership style and how they'd like it to be. And that's going to inform a new company that I'm setting up. It's going to inform the branding. It's going to inform the products that we're offering. So I really want to make sure that we're offering products that are really going to meet the needs of leaders out there right now. And so if anybody would like to help out, would like a mini reflective coaching session, then please get in touch and let me know.
Brilliant. Okay. And we'll definitely include those links and how people can get in contact with you in our supporting blog post. So thank you so much, Rachel, and we'll let you go. But it was absolutely fascinating to have you on, and thank you so much for all your input and sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Big Bright podcast. Make sure to subscribe to never miss an episode and check out our website at builtbybright.com.